Does your ham shack tell a story? Think about that. Does your ham shack and your ham radio journey tell a story? Does it touch parts of your life? 2026 marks 50 years since I was first licensed as an amateur radio operator. In June of 1976, I received my novice call sign, which was WN2FRX. And a few months after that, when I passed my general, it became WB2FRX. And then sometime after that, I passed my advanced exam. And then years later, when the opportunity came to get a vanity call sign, I upgraded it to K2CJB. Recently, I reconfigured my ham shack. But I also took that opportunity to collect bits of memorabilia that had to do with my ham radio hobby, but also my broadcast engineering career, which was really launched because I was a ham operator. I got my ham license in high school, but I went to college with an interest to go into television production. But I also studied and passed my first class commercial radio telephone operator's license. Between my ham license and my first class license, I got my first job working at a radio station in maintenance. Then I worked in maintenance engineering at ABC Television in New York, at WWOR in Secaucus, and then back to ABC in New York. And from there, I went on and got an engineering degree, and then moved into the engineering department at ABC, moved up into technology project management, and then eventually engineering management. From there, I went to Fox News Channel as director of engineering, where I ran the engineering department at Fox News Channel for 5 years. After that, I was vice president of engineering at Fox Television Network in LA. And then a wonderful opportunity came about, and that was to oversee some major technology projects, cutting edge technology projects at ABC in New York. And we're going to touch upon some of those as we look at some of this memorabilia that I've assembled here. Now, I don't expect many views for this video, but if you're a younger ham, I really hope this encourages you to show you just how much of an impact ham radio can have on your life. And if you're an older ham like myself, maybe this will cause you to look back and just see how much ham radio influenced your life. The desk with all the radio gear on it is down here, but it's all up here that tells the story. So I'm just going to walk through this and just talk a little bit about how each of these bits kind of talk a little bit about my thread, the thread of K2CJB throughout my life. So starting up top, I've got a couple of old tube radios. The one on the left, I got that at a garage sale, $10. It works. At least last time I tried it, it worked. But it does work, but man, it looks great. It's an old Zenith tabletop radio. They don't make them like that anymore. The one next to that belonged to my uncle, and I believe he got it from his uncle. So this radio goes way back. It's made by the Emerson Radio Company. An old tube rig, right? I'm afraid to turn it on. The wood cabinet's kind of falling apart on it, needs a lot of work. That's more like a family heirloom sort of thing that I have here. But two classic tube radios up on the top shelf. And tube radios play an important part of my story because my first HF radio was a tube radio, and we're going to get to that. On the next shelf, I have a Radio Shack DX160. I never had one in my shack when I was younger, but I had the opportunity to get one on eBay a couple of years ago. I just got nostalgic and got it. It works okay. It's not great, probably needs an alignment and probably needs a little bit of other work to restore it. But man, it looks great. Again, a classic radio. But it's these two here that really begin the story of my ham radio journey. When I was a little kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, my dad must have gone to a Sinclair gas station and they were selling or giving away these little transistor radios. Now, this isn't the one that he had. He had one exactly like it. Again, another eBay find. And he gave it to me as a little kid. And I remember every night I would take the little earbud, flesh-colored earbud, and stick it in my ear. And I listened to WNBC Radio, 66 AM. And I used to listen to this guy named Brad Crandall, who had a talk show. He was talking politics and current events. I was a kid. I didn't know what he was talking about. But every night, my parents are watching TV. I had this radio, and I had the earpiece on, and I listened to this guy every night. Radio. It started when I was very young. Years later, my mom for Christmas got me a multiband radio just like this one. This isn't it. That one died long ago. But this one is exactly like it. Again, another eBay find. And what's on it is AM, FM, and VHF low and VHF high. Now, back in the day, the VHF low, you listened to Aircraft, which we used to listen to all the time. We weren't far from JFK Airport. And in the VHF high section, we had 162.55. That was the National Weather Service. That's when they had real announcers, by the way. And I would listen to taxi cabs and things like that. But right in between, I used to hear these guys talking every night. They were hams. It was a local repeater. And I listened so often that I recognized their voices and call signs every night. This was junior high, maybe. And one day, one of the guys gave out his address. So I hopped on my 10-speed bike, took my multiband radio, went to his house, knocked on the door, and he was thrilled to meet me, invited me in, showed me his shack, and worked Germany, I'll never forget it, from his shack. And another radio serves as a mile marker in my life. Now, radios that I used to talk on began with CB radio. I had an old Gonset communicator, a 4-channel crystal-controlled CB radio that I bought from one of my dad's cousins for $10. And this is when I was in junior high school. And we put up an antenna, and I met all the guys in the neighborhood that had radios like me, and we talked CB. And I talked on the CB every night. It wasn't until I got into high school when I was talking with one of my CB friends in the hallway when I met a dear friend of mine who introduced me to ham radio. He was like my Elmer. He brought me into the hobby. He invited me over to his house, and he had his radio set up, and he talked to Pittsburgh. Never forget it. I was thrilled to be able to talk 5 towns away. This guy talked 3 states away. Amazing. I got hooked. Now, like I said, it was ham radio that really got me into my broadcast engineering career. Now, when I was in college, I joined the college radio station, and I was on the air and had things like that. But the technical advisor knew that I had a ham ticket. And he was also somebody that guided me along to help me earn my FCC first-class commercial license. But that got me into radio when I was in college. And the combination of a ham ticket and my first-class ticket got me my first job in radio at WHLI on Long Island, where I worked as kind of like a production engineer and a maintenance engineer. And from there, I got a job at a local television station. And then I worked at ABC in New York. I worked at WWOR Channel 9. It was in New York and then in Secaucus. Went back to ABC and then went to Fox News Channel and Fox and back to ABC. And now we're going to go through some of the highlights of that broadcast engineering career. We're going to start on this middle shelf. On the wall in the back is my first class ticket, which was grandfathered into a general radio telephone operator license. That was the license you needed to be a chief engineer of a radio station. My ham ticket and my GMRS ticket are here. A couple of pictures of my older ham shacks. I had a TS930 at one point. I had a Drake C-Line for a while. And some of my radio friends might recognize these books over here. 3 editions of the Robert Schrader Electronic Communication textbook. The first one was given to me by a guy who was a radio DJ outside of Boston. He was a friend of my dad's, and he knew I wanted to go into radio broadcasting. He was the one that told me I needed my first class license, and he said if I studied that book and knew it, I would get the license. It took a lot more than that to get that license, but it was a start. And then years later, I got the next edition, and many years after that, I got another edition of it. Some of you might also recognize the orange Milton Kaufman radio license study guide. That was important. Now we move to the top shelf, and these are where some of the highlights of my broadcast engineering career are. I oversaw the design and installation of the first television network HD release control room, and a release control room is where programs were sent and transmitted out to the affiliates for broadcast. That was the first of its kind. In fact, it made it to the cover of a book. The other pictures you might recognize as a large fiber installation. That large technology project I mentioned earlier was to develop and design and oversee the construction of a television network transmission facility. All the devices that had to be connected together within the ABC television network, which were hundreds upon hundreds of devices, had to go through a switching center. That was my project. And we decided to run it all on fiber so there wouldn't be any issues with the high data rates of HD video of 1.5 gigabits. We put it on fiber, the only facility of its kind at the time. That facility won a Broadcast Engineering Award that we received at the NAB convention the following year. And the picture on the right is yours truly standing in the main control room of that facility when it was done. The plaque that's up in the middle is actually a duplicate of a patent that I was awarded working on that project. I developed this routing control scheme that had never been done before. And working for Disney, they submitted it for a patent, of which there was a patent awarded. And speaking of Disney, I put in a total of 21 years and received the 20-year award. That's that big Simba statue you see up there. And then on the right side is actually Waterford crystal mouse ears for my 21 years of service. Down on the bottom shelf, you'll see a set of framed Olympic pins for the last year that ABC carried the Olympics. Trading pins is a big deal for the Olympics, and ABC made these available to the company. It's a wonderful collector's piece. Also on that shelf are a couple of plaques I received for giving presentations at SIMPTE conferences, probably about my facilities that I built. And on the lower right, you'll see a letter. That letter was written by that dear friend of mine that Elmered me back in high school. He wrote that letter to congratulate me for passing my general ham radio license exam. But I've kept that letter because it meant so much to me. We both worked at radio stations. We both worked at television stations. We both worked at ABC together. In fact, at the end of our years, we worked together in the same department at ABC. My dear friend, K2CJB. So on those shelves contain the story of the thread of how ham radio influenced my life. Now we're going to just take a look at some ham radio specific things and a quick look at my desk. I'm not a contester by far, but I do enjoy earning some awards in the hobby. So over here is my brag wall. Worked all states, DXCC, and worked all continents. Wonderful operating awards to go for. They're fun to get. As with any ham shack, here's HT Land, and it runs the gamut. A couple of FRS radios, a couple of GMRS radios, a Baofeng, which I think we all have. It's like standard issue now. A TYT Tribander, the Yaesu FT70D, and an old ICOM T7. In the back is a Radio Shack handheld scanner. It's amazing how these things seem to reproduce on their own. Here I have an old Radio Shack digital scanner, and I say old because the digital formats that this radio receives are no longer used. So right now I use it as a weather radio because it has the same SAME technology built into it, so I can get weather alerts if there's some severe weather coming. Down here is an old Alliance HD73 rotor. It still works. I bought this in 1986. And the only thing I've had to replace on this or the rotator on a roof, and here, the pilot light has to get replaced. If that goes out, the rotor stops working. And on the roof, I replaced the clamps on the rotor once. I've never had it rebuilt or anything like that. It's 40 years old, and it still works fine. The main rig, an FTDX 3000, wonderful radio. I've had it for quite a few years. I got it when it first came out. In fact, when I got it, the matching speaker wasn't available. So I have this SP30 next to it, which sounds amazing. Got this West Mountain digital noise reduction box. Really don't use it that often. Probably don't really need it because of the features that are in the Yaesu. Great setup here. This is controlled typically under Ham Radio Deluxe, which I have up here on the PC. What also runs up here is all the programming software for HTs, for the GMRS rig, and for the Kenwood VHF UHF radio. We'll get to those in a moment. This meter here is for my 6-meter Squalo antenna that's up on the roof. Some of you may have seen that video when I built that years ago. Still here and still works. This is the meter I use to just make sure that that antenna is still in good health when I'm operating. Some of you might recognize this, the Radioddity DB20 GMRS base radio. I did a video on this as well. Nice little radio. A couple of repeaters nearby that I listen to. One of them has a guy that's on all day long, so I had to turn that off. But I have made a few contacts on this since I put it together. Below it is a power and SWR meter for the DB20. Here's my Kenwood rig, VHF, UHF. It's a Kenwood TM-V71. You can listen to 2 repeaters at once. I do that. I've been checking in with a local repeater here, a couple of towns away recently. Nice bunch of guys. I'm hoping to get out to a meeting soon. In this corner, I've got a Radio Shack CB with sideband. Below it, a Radio Shack 10-meter radio. And below that, a tuner, an MFJ tuner. Both of these radios go through this switch, which will now select which radio goes through the antenna system of the tuner, the meter, and a vertical antenna that operates 10 to 12 meters. And finally, over here, antenna switching. The CB and 10-meter rig are switched there. This selects which of the antennas the HF rig is connected to. It's either an off-center fed dipole, the TA33 Junior, or the 12 and 17-meter fan dipole that I built some time ago. This switch here selects between the FTDX 3000 and a classic radio that I purchased also through eBay, and that is my Tempo 1. This old Tempo needs some work, needs some tubes, which I have. I want to do other projects to it, like replace the power cord to a 3-prong power cord, replace the filter caps in the power supply, and there are 2 capacitors inside the radio that if they fail, will literally blow the radio up. I might add that that little Heathkit meter that's next to the Tempo was part of my original novice shack. So that's my ham shack, and that's the story my ham shack tells. I have to share a quick story. One of the guys I heard in that repeater, listening on that multi-band radio, years later, I'm driving down the Garden State Parkway, and I heard a voice on the local repeater, and sure enough, it was one of those guys, and I recognized the call sign. I had to break into the conversation. I told him that story, and he was absolutely amazed. So how about you? Does your shack tell your story? As you look through your shack, do you see how it influenced your life? As you look through your shack, does it remind you of people you met along the way? And again, if you're a younger ham, like I mentioned earlier, does this encourage you to show you just how ham radio can influence your life in a big way? I just have to say that ham radio has been a huge part of my life, and I'm so thankful to my friend John, K2CJB, for introducing me to it, because it really influenced my life. So until the next time we meet, 73 from K2CJB.